The first scream came from deep within the forest. Not the high-pitched cry of a bird or the distant call of a coyote, but something sharper, raw, tangled with pain in a way Lily Bennett had never heard before. It sliced through the stillness of the Montana woods like a blade, so sudden that her breath snagged in her throat, and the worn leather straps of her backpack bit into her shoulders as she froze mid-step. The pine trees around her stood tall and silent, their jagged silhouettes scraping at the pale blue sky above the Bitterroot Mountains. The heavy scent of sap and earth filled the air, and beyond the tree line, the faint roar of Silver Pine Creek wound its way through the valley like a restless snake. She should have turned around, should have followed the trail markers back to her grandma's cabin like Helen had told her that morning. Be back before dinner, Lily. This forest doesn't care how brave you think you are. But curiosity was a stubborn thing, and so was Lily. 8 years old, gangly-limbed, wild-haired, with scratches along her shins and dirt permanently embedded under her fingernails, Lily had never been good at staying put. And Silverpine was the kind of place that whispered secrets through the trees, daring you to explore. But that scream, that wasn't a secret she wanted to uncover, not alone. Still, her legs moved before her head could argue, boots crunching over pine needles, weaving between thick trunks as her pulse beat faster in her ears. The deeper she went, the quieter the forest became, the usual hum of birds and insects fading until even her breathing sounded too loud. The second sound wasn't a scream, it was a whimper, low, ragged, drawn from the edge of exhaustion and unmistakably canine. Lily's eyes widened. A dog. She broke into a run, branches whipping at her arms as the ground sloped downward toward a narrow clearing. And there, half hidden by the undergrowth near the banks of the creek, was the source of the sound. A German shepherd lay sprawled in the dirt, her dark coat streaked with mud and blood, one powerful leg twisted grotesquely in the rusted jaws of a steel animal trap. Her body trembled with each shallow breath, the kind of tremor that came from pain and the fight to stay conscious. But that wasn't what made Lily's stomach lurch. It was the tiny bundle pressed against the dog's side. A puppy, barely old enough to stand, its fur patchy, ribs visible beneath its fragile frame. The little thing whimpered weakly, nosing at its mother's unmoving form, while the shepherd's glassy eyes stayed locked on the pup with quiet desperation. Lily's feet rooted to the ground, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might drown out the sounds of the creek. The boughs overhead creaked in the wind, and somewhere beyond the tree line, a crow cawed once, a harsh, hollow sound that made her skin crawl. The dog's ears twitched. She tried to shift her weight, failed, and let out a strained whine, her eyes sliding toward Lily with a look that sent a chill through the girl's spine. It wasn't just pain, it was pleading. Hey, girl, it's okay," Lily whispered, voice cracking around the edges as she stepped closer, ignoring the way her stomach twisted at the sight of blood pooling beneath the shepherd's leg. The puppy squeaked, tiny paws slipping as it tried to stumble toward Lily, collapsing halfway there. The mother's gaze followed, her whole body trembling as she shifted just enough to nudge the pup closer with her nose. And then, the impossible happened. The dog cried, actual tears clear as glass welled at the corners of her amber eyes and slid down her dirt-matted fur. Her muscles quivered, her jaws clenched, but her attention never wavered from the tiny, fragile life beside her. Lily's throat tightened, her knees hitting the ground as she scooped the puppy into her arms, its frail body trembling with cold and fear. The shepherd's breathing hitched in relief, her head lowering to the earth as though surrendering to the exhaustion pressing down on her. "Don't worry," Lily whispered, her voice steadier now, fire sparking beneath her fear. "I'm not leaving you here." Her hands fumbled for the rusted trap, fingers numb as she tried to pry it open, but the ancient metal barely budged. A frustrated sob rose in her chest. She needed help, real help. And then it hit her. The story Grandma Helen had told just last night as they sat by the fireplace, sipping tea while the shadows from the flames danced across the walls. About the poachers rumored to be lurking along the Bitterroot Range, about the traps that didn't care if they snapped shut on wolves, deer, or even people. About the gunshots Helen had heard echoing through the forest 2 weeks before. Lily's breath came faster now, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. A sharp crack, wood splintering somewhere deeper in the woods, made her flinch, her eyes darting to the shadows between the trees. Another sound followed, faint but unmistakable, the metallic click of a rifle bolt sliding into place. They weren't alone. Fear roared in her ears, but instinct screamed louder. She clutched the puppy tighter, whispering a promise to the shepherd as she stumbled to her feet, legs shaking with adrenaline. "I'll be back," she swore, barely recognizing the raw edge in her own voice. "I'll get help, I promise." The shepherd's eyes fluttered closed, her ragged breathing slowing as if placing all her faith in the trembling girl clutching her only surviving pup. Lily didn't waste another second. She bolted through the undergrowth, branches clawing at her arms, her boots slipping on moss and loose rocks as the sound of the creek faded behind her. The puppy squirmed weakly against her chest, its heartbeat fluttering like a trapped bird. The forest seemed darker now, shadows twisting beneath the towering pines, every crack of a branch sending fear spiking through her ribs. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, but the image of that shepherd, bloodied, broken, yet still fighting for her pup, pushed her faster. By the time the cabin's weather-beaten roof came into view, Lily was gasping for breath, her voice cracking as she burst through the front door, puppy still cradled in her arms. "Grandma!" Helen Bennett's eyes snapped up from the kitchen table, her weathered face sharpening with concern the second she saw Lily, and the trembling creature she carried. "There's a dog," Lily panted, voice rough with panic and dirt. "She's hurt bad. Someone's in the woods." Helen was already moving, the sharpness of an old soldier returning to her posture as she grabbed the emergency kit and checked the hunting rifle mounted by the door. And outside, beyond the safety of their walls, the forest kept its secrets. But for the first time in her life, Lily wasn't about to turn away. Not when a shepherd had placed her faith in her. Helen Bennett didn't waste time asking questions. 68 years of living in the Bitterroot Mountains taught her one truth. When the woods cry out, you listen. And when a girl runs home with that look in her eyes, carrying a half-dead pup and shaking like a leaf, there's no time for lectures, only action. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar smoke and old pine sap, the remnants of supper still cooling on the stove, but the atmosphere had shifted. Heavy now, threaded with urgency. Helen's eyes locked onto the pup, its breathing shallow, ribs sharp beneath the damp, matted coat. "Set her here," Helen ordered, sweeping the stack of field guides off the table in one practiced motion. Her voice was calm, steady, the same tone she used when patching bullet wounds on soldiers half a century ago, and it cut through Lily's panic like a blade. Lily obeyed without argument, her small hands fumbling as she placed the puppy on the worn quilt. Her chest still rose and fell too fast, but her eyes never left the door, darting toward the dark tree line visible through the window. "They're still out there," Lily whispered, voice tight, words tripping over themselves. "Someone. I heard shots. I think they're looking for her." Helen's hands moved efficiently, fingers probing the fragile limbs of the pup, checking for breaks, assessing dehydration, her expression unreadable. "We'll deal with that in a second." The puppy stirred faintly, letting out a thin, reedy whimper, It was all skin and bones, patchy fur caked with mud, but it was alive. Barely. Where's the mother? Helen's tone softened only slightly as her gaze lifted. She's hurt. The words tumbled out of Lily in a rush, eyes glassy with tears that hadn't fallen yet. She's stuck in a trap. Her legs... Her throat closed up around the memory. Blood. Metal teeth biting into flesh. That haunted, pleading look. Helen's jaw tightened. You saw where? In near the creek, halfway down the slope. Helen was already moving, snatching the first aid kit from the shelf, stuffing gauze, antiseptic, emergency splints into her old canvas satchel. The movement's muscle memory now. She pulled on her thick jacket, grabbed the flashlight, and slung the weathered hunting rifle over her shoulder without hesitation. Stay here, she said, voice firm but not unkind. Lily's eyes flashed wide. I'm coming. It wasn't a question. For half a beat, Helen considered arguing, but the fire behind Lily's stubborn glare reminded her too much of herself at that age. Besides, the girl had already been out there once. Sending her alone again wasn't an option. Helen nodded once. Boots, now. The forest was different at night. The towering evergreen stood in rigid formation, black silhouettes pressed against the moonlit sky. The path was barely visible, half buried beneath moss and old leaves, and the shadows crawled between the trees like something alive. But Helen walked with certainty, her steps quiet, rifle balanced comfortably along her back, eyes scanning every break in the underbrush. The faint sound of the creek grew louder as they approached, rushing water trickling over rocks, slicing through the hush like static. Lily kept close, breath shallow, her sneakers scuffing against stones as they descended the slope. They found the shepherd where Lily had left her. She hadn't moved much. Her body was curled protectively, one hind leg twisted grotesquely in the steel jaws of a rusted trap, fur matted with blood and grime. Her breathing was labored, every rise and fall of her chest marked with effort. But when they stepped into view, her head lifted weakly, eyes focusing despite the pain. Helen knelt beside the dog without hesitation, her hands sure and steady, inspecting the wound, fingers brushing lightly over the soft, dirt-streaked fur near the shepherd's ear. That's when she saw it. The faint ink hidden beneath the layers of grime. Military markings. A series of small, precise numbers and letters tattooed along the inner ear, half concealed by mud and matted fur. Helen's breath caught for the briefest second. Recognition flickered sharp in her eyes. Military working dog, she muttered, brushing the fur back further to get a better look. She's a soldier. Lily blinked, confusion shadowing her features. Like from the army? Helen nodded, lips pressed thin, mind working quickly. Her unit's coded here, Afghanistan deployment by the look of it. Something settled heavily in Helen's chest. She'd seen these markings before, years ago when patching up K-9 units brought back from the front lines, their bodies scarred by shrapnel and landmines, their loyalty unwavering despite wounds the world never saw. She's not some stray, Helen continued, already working to free the dog's leg from the trap. Her hands moved with practiced ease, flipping the release mechanism with a strength honed over decades. The rusted metal groaned, the tension snapping free as the trap's jagged teeth finally sprang open. The shepherd whimpered, but didn't fight. Her gaze locked onto Lily, unwavering, filled with a tired kind of gratitude and a fierce protectiveness Helen recognized too well. They rigged a stretcher from Helen's old tarp, threading rope through the corners, creating makeshift handles. Lifting the shepherd wasn't easy, her body heavy with muscle despite the wounds, but Helen's arms were still stronger than most expected for someone pushing 70. They hauled her carefully back to the cabin, every rustle of the underbrush, every distant crack of a branch setting Lily's nerves on edge. But no more gunshots came. Only the forest settling heavy with silence. The cabin's soft glow bled through the trees as they approached, warm light spilling across the porch. The tiny pup stirred weakly by the hearth, letting out a high-pitched whimper as they entered, eyes brightening when it caught sight of its mother. Helen laid the shepherd gently beside the fire, inspecting the leg again under the stronger lamplight. It was bad, swollen, the flesh darkening around the edges, infection already creeping in. She might lose the leg, Helen murmured, her voice low but steady, words carrying the weight of years spent delivering hard truths. But she's not done fighting. The dog's breathing evened out slightly, eyes drifting closed as exhaustion overtook her, the steady rise and fall of her chest grounding the room in a fragile sense of hope. Helen wiped her hands on a rag, expression unreadable. Her name's probably registered, she added softly, staring down at the faded numbers. She served her country, probably saved lives over there, and someone just left her to die out here. Lily's throat tightened, her hand drifting to the shepherd's fur, the warmth beneath her fingers comforting in its frailty. She didn't give up, Lily whispered, voice cracking. The memory of the blood, the pain, the desperate eyes burning fresh in her mind. She saved her puppy. She tried so hard. Helen's gaze softened for a breath, her hand resting gently on Lily's shoulder. "So did you," she said quietly. "If you hadn't found her, they'd both be gone." Lily didn't reply, but the knot of fear and helplessness in her chest loosened, just slightly, replaced by the faintest flicker of something else. Resolve. The soldier's legacy wasn't over yet. The first rays of morning slipped quietly through the curtains, casting faint golden stripes across the worn floorboards of the cabin. The fire had burned low overnight, but the steady rise and fall of the German shepherd's chest near the hearth told Lily everything she needed to know. Faith was still here, still fighting. Scout, the tiny pup with fur like faded ash and eyes too big for his frail face, slept curled tight beside his mother, his breathing shallow but steady. His little belly rose and fell like clockwork, and every few minutes his tiny paws twitched as if he were dreaming of something far bigger than himself. Lily sat cross-legged by the fire, chin resting on her knees, watching them both in silence. Her grandmother moved quietly in the kitchen behind her, preparing coffee, the rhythmic clinking of mugs and the hiss of the old kettle grounding the otherwise still room. The cabin felt different this morning. The same creaking floors, the same framed photographs of long-gone relatives hanging crooked on the walls, but the air buzzed with something new. Like the weight of last night hadn't faded, it had settled. Helen approached, setting a chipped mug beside Lily, steam curling from the surface. "She made it through the night," her grandmother remarked, voice rough with exhaustion, but threaded with quiet pride. "That counts for something." Lily's fingers curled around the warm ceramic, her eyes never leaving Faith. "She's strong," she murmured, the word catching in her throat as the images from yesterday resurfaced. The blood, the rusted trap, that impossible look of gratitude in Faith's amber eyes. "She's more than strong," Helen replied, sinking onto the sofa with a quiet groan. "She's trained, disciplined. That kind of resilience doesn't come from backyard fences." Lily sipped her coffee, bitter and scalding, but it steadied her all the same. "You think she remembers all of it?" she asked softly. Helen's eyes darkened with memory. They never forget. The knock at the door came mid-morning, sharp, purposeful. Helen tensed, her hand drifting instinctively toward the old rifle leaning by the woodpile. but Lily was already on her feet, peeking through the window. A truck idled in the clearing beyond the porch. Faded blue, rust curling along the edges of the doors. A man and woman stood by the steps, their expressions tense but hopeful. The woman's eyes, glassy with emotion, darted anxiously toward the windows, while the man, broad-shouldered mid-40s, a ball cap pulled low over his forehead, shifted nervously, wringing his hands. Helen exhaled, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Brennan family," she murmured, as if confirming an old hunch. "I called them last night." The door creaked open, letting in the crisp morning air and the scent of pine sap. The woman stepped forward first, her voice trembling at the edges. "We heard you found her. Please, is it true?" Lily nodded, stepping aside to reveal Faith, still curled weakly by the fire, her head lifting just enough to track the visitors with weary eyes. The woman gasped, one hand flying to her mouth, tears brimming instantly. "Faith," she whispered, crossing the room in 3 hurried steps before kneeling beside the shepherd, her fingers trembling as they brushed along Faith's dirt-caked fur. "Oh my God, we thought you were gone." The man joined her, crouching low, his rough exterior cracking as he stroked Faith's side, voice thick with quiet disbelief. "She's alive." Helen explained the rest: the trap, the infection, the long night of uncertainty, but the Brennan family barely heard her. Their attention was locked onto the wounded shepherd, their relief pouring off them in waves. They stayed for an hour, sharing pieces of Faith's story between tears and shaky laughter. She had served overseas, deployed twice to Afghanistan, trained as a combat tracking dog. When her service ended, the Brennans adopted her, hoping to give her the peaceful retirement she'd earned. But 6 months ago, during a weekend camping trip near the Bitterroot Range, Faith vanished into the trees and never came back. "We searched everywhere," Mrs. Brennan whispered, stroking Faith's paw gently. "Posters, calls, we thought she'd—" Her voice cracked, the unsaid words hanging heavy between them. But even as relief filled the room, reality settled like a weight in Lily's chest. "You're taking her home?" Lily's voice wobbled despite her best effort to sound steady. Mr. Brennan shook his head, sorrow flickering across his weathered face. "We wish we could," he admitted, glancing toward his wife. "But we lost our lease on the house last month. We're living with family now. They won't allow dogs and Faith." His eyes drifted toward Scout, still curled at his mother's side, fragile and quiet. "She has her pup to protect now." The words sank in slowly, twisting Lily's stomach with something she couldn't name. Relief, sadness, something more complicated. After the Brennans left, promising to cover medical costs and visit when they could, the cabin fell quiet again. Lily's restlessness returned as the afternoon stretched on, her fingers tracing the worn fabric of the couch as her mind wandered. She found the military insignia first, buried beneath Faith's old harness, tucked away in a side pocket worn thin with age, a small, weathered patch embroidered with a crest and numbers that matched the faint ink behind Faith's ear. But it was the folded paper beneath the insignia that made her breath catch. A letter, handwritten, faded but intact. The signature at the bottom sent a chill down her spine. Sergeant James Cooper. Lily read the letter twice, her eyes skimming over the neat cursive lines, the words heavy with a soldier's care and gratitude. He wrote of Faith's bravery, of the lives she saved overseas, of the bond between handler and dog that words could never fully explain. And beneath it all, an undertone of quiet sorrow. Guilt, as if the man who penned it knew he owed his life to Faith and wasn't sure how to repay that debt. The letter burned in Lily's hands, but not with fear, with purpose. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the treetops and the shadows stretched long across the cabin floor, a knock sounded again at the door. This time, it wasn't family. It was Evelyn Morris, a sharp-eyed local reporter with a notepad tucked into her jacket, her expression curious and calculating as she stepped inside. "I heard there's a hero under your roof," she remarked lightly, nodding toward Faith and Scout curled by the fire. The article hit the papers the next morning. Front page, bold headlines proclaiming the rescue, the unlikely survival, the mother dog's sacrifice. It should have felt like victory. But when gunshots cracked through the distant woods that night, echoing across the valley like ghosts, Lily understood. The forest wasn't done with them yet. The night after the article hit the papers, Lily couldn't sleep. Outside, the forest creaked and moaned beneath the weight of wind curling down from the bitterroot peaks, the towering pines swaying like giants, whispering in a language only the mountains understood. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, casting faint gold light across the walls and flickering against the glass of the framed photographs her grandmother kept lined along the mantel. Old black and white portraits, medals tucked away, the quiet legacy of lives lived before Lily ever took her first breath. Faith and Scout lay near the hearth, their bodies curled tight against each other. The pup's breathing steady now, his frail body filling out with each passing day. But Lily's mind wouldn't quiet. Not after the gunshots 2 nights ago. Not after the newspaper article turned their home into whispered conversations at the general store, side glances at the post office, curious faces slowing their cars near the dirt road that led to the cabin. The world knew Faith's story now, and not everyone out there cared about happy endings. Lily shifted beneath her quilt, watching the faint glow of embers pulse against the wooden walls. The bruises on Faith's leg had darkened, the infection stubborn but losing its grip, yet the old shepherd still carried herself like every step was borrowed time. Each breath a quiet rebellion against the wounds life had carved into her. Helen stirred in the rocking chair, her eyes shadowed with the weight of old ghosts, her fingers tracing the rim of the chipped coffee mug she'd nursed all evening. "You think they'll come back?" Lily's voice broke the quiet, soft but raw, with the question that had gnawed at her ribs for days. Helen didn't answer right away. She stared toward the window, the faint outline of trees bending against the wind just visible beyond the frost-bitten glass. "The woods don't forget, Lil," she murmured finally, her voice low and heavy. "And neither do the people who leave scars on them." Lily swallowed hard, her fingers curling into the edges of the blanket. "I should have been braver," she whispered, the confession burning as it left her throat. "That night, I froze. I wanted to help, but I was scared." Helen's eyes softened, the hard edges of her face easing as she set the mug down and crossed the room. She sank onto the edge of Lily's bed, her hand finding Lily's shoulder warm and steady. "Bravery isn't not being scared," Helen said quietly, her thumb brushing a stray curl from Lily's cheek. "It's doing the hard thing even when your legs shake." She paused, her gaze drifting toward Faith. "And it's knowing sometimes you don't make it in time. But that doesn't mean you stop showing up." The weight of those words settled deep in Lily's chest, anchoring something inside her that had drifted loose since the day she found Faith bleeding in the dirt. The next morning, Dr. Walter Cooper arrived with a folder tucked under his arm, his weathered face tight with something unreadable as he stepped through the door. Faith lifted her head weakly at his presence, her ears twitching faintly, eyes sharpening with recognition as he knelt beside her. "She remembers you," Lily remarked softly, watching the subtle shift in Faith's posture, the way her breathing calmed, the faint wag of her tail against the floorboards. Cooper offered a small, tight smile, his fingers tracing gently along Faith's muzzle. "She should," he replied, his voice thick with something Lily couldn't quite name. "We've both been through enough not to forget." The folder opened with a quiet snap, papers sliding free, service records, faded photographs, medical reports stamped with military insignias. Lily's eyes widened as she skimmed the pages, the words bleeding together in her mind. Explosives detection, combat tracking, multiple deployments, wounded in the line of duty, honorable discharge. And beneath it all, incidents, injuries, the scars that weren't always visible but etched themselves into bones, into memory. Faith hadn't just been a soldier. She had been a hero. She pulled 3 Marines from a collapsed compound outside Kabul, Cooper explained quietly, flipping to a weathered photograph. Faith in full tactical gear, her fur sleek and eyes fierce, the hint of dust and ash clouding the edges of the image. Took shrapnel to the side, lost part of her hearing. They still say she never hesitated. Lily's chest tightened, awe tangling with sorrow as she ran her fingers lightly over the photograph. "Why'd they leave her here?" she asked, her voice cracking at the edges. "After all that, how does a hero end up forgotten in the woods?" Cooper's jaw flexed, his gaze hardening as he shut the folder with a quiet snap. "The world doesn't always keep its promises, kid," he replied, his voice rough. "Sometimes it forgets the ones who gave the most." Lily said nothing, but the ache in her chest sharpened like a blade. Later that evening, after the sun bled orange and gold across the peaks and the mountains settled under the hush of twilight, Lily found herself in the attic, rummaging through boxes of forgotten things. Her hands brushed past faded quilts, yellowed maps, the faint scent of cedar clinging to old memories. She found it buried beneath a stack of her grandfather's jackets. A leather-bound journal, the edges frayed, pages curled with age. Inside, the careful scrawl of her grandmother's handwriting danced across the yellowed paper. Field notes, sketches of old injuries, names of dogs long since gone, and at the bottom of one page, a single line. "Faith's haven. One day, maybe." Lily's fingers trembled as she traced the words, the quiet promise threaded through the ink. A shelter, a place for the lost, the wounded, the forgotten, the ones like Faith who never stopped fighting even when the world looked away. The knock at the door startled her. She rushed downstairs to find a boy on the porch, no older than her, maybe 9, with dark curls, wide eyes, and a trembling bundle cradled in his arms. A pup, soaked from the rain, shaking with cold, its tiny ribs visible beneath patchy fur, amber eyes flickering with faint defiance. "I found him," the boy whispered, his voice small but fierce. He was all alone. Lily's throat tightened, her gaze drifting from the trembling pup to Faith resting near the fire. Scout snuggled against her side, and for the first time in days, a fragile sense of hope bloomed in her chest. "Come in," Lily said softly, holding the door open wide. "You're not alone now." The wind curled softly through the pines, carrying the faint scent of cedar and new beginnings. The clearing outside Helen Bennett's cabin didn't look like much, just patches of wild grass, wooden fence posts leaning from years of neglect. But today it was different. Today it was alive. The banner stretched between 2 crooked posts fluttered gently in the breeze. Faith's haven, a place for the forgotten, the wounded, the brave. Lily stood by the porch, her fingers twisting the hem of her shirt, watching as cars bumped along the dirt road one after another. They came slowly at first. Neighbors, curious townsfolk, but soon the clearing filled with voices, footsteps crunching over dry leaves, the hum of conversation blending with birdsong overhead. Evelyn Morris from the Gazette scribbled notes in the corner, her camera hanging around her neck, capturing every smile, every handshake. A few reporters from larger papers milled around, but they didn't matter as much, not compared to the others. The Brennans were here, standing near the fence, tears shining in Mrs. Brennan's eyes as she watched Faith rest beneath the shade of a tall pine. The old shepherd's injured leg had healed as much as it ever would, but the stump where her paw had once been didn't slow her down now. She sat tall, Scout pressed against her side, eyes bright, ears perked as if standing guard over it all. And beside the cabin, Evan Miller clutched the leash of the new pup, a scrappy, gangly thing with oversized paws and amber eyes that mirrored Faith's. The boy beamed as the dog tumbled clumsily through the grass, tail wagging like it belonged here, like it had always belonged. Deputy Ryan Cole parked his cruiser near the edge of the clearing, stepping out with a quiet smile, his badge glinting faintly in the sun. He made his way toward Helen, nodding toward the assembled crowd. "Good turnout," he remarked, his voice low, weathered. Helen chuckled under her breath, eyes crinkling with pride. People remember when you give them something to believe in. Ryan's expression darkened slightly, his gaze drifting toward the tree line where remnants of old traps still lurked in the underbrush, silent reminders of the men he'd arrested weeks earlier. The poachers, the ones who'd littered the forest with steel jaws and rusted chains, hunting for trophies with no regard for the lives they shattered along the way. "They won't be back," Ryan assured, his voice firm, conviction sharpening every word. "We got them all." Lily's shoulders relaxed at the sound of it. She still woke some nights, heart pounding, the phantom sound of gunfire curling in her ears. But today the air felt lighter, safer. The ceremony started with simple words. Helen speaking softly to the crowd, her voice steady, recounting Faith's story, the night Lily found her bleeding in the woods, the fight to save Scout, the battles fought in silence. "And now," Helen continued, reaching into the canvas bag resting at her feet, "it's time to pass something on." She pulled out a small weathered object, the red ball, faded with age, the faint scuffs along its surface a quiet testament to the miles it had traveled. Faith's most prized possession from her years of service, the thing she carried across continents, through deserts, always at her side. Helen crouched beside Lily, pressing the ball into the girl's trembling hands. "She carried this through war zones," Helen whispered, her voice cracking faintly. "Through storms, through the worst life threw at her, and now it's yours." Lily's throat tightened as she looked down at the ball, the weight of it heavier than she expected. Her fingers curled around it, the cool surface grounding her in ways she couldn't explain. Faith shifted beside them, nudging Lily's leg gently with her nose, eyes soft but unwavering, the same look she'd given her that first terrifying day in the woods, battered but unbroken. A lump formed in Lily's throat, her voice trembling as she straightened, the crowd falling quiet around her. "Faith didn't just save Scout," she began, her eyes drifting toward the trees, the mountains beyond. "She saved me. She taught me. You don't give up, not on your family, not on yourself, and not on the ones who can't speak for themselves." The words cracked with emotion, but she pushed through, her fingers tightening around the ball. "This place, it's for them, for the ones people forget, for the ones who fought and got left behind, but not anymore." Applause rippled through the clearing, the sound blending with the distant rustle of leaves, the whisper of the wind threading through the branches. Later, as the sun sank low behind the ridge, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold, Lily sat on the porch steps, Scout curled against her side, Faith dozing in the grass nearby. The new pup, whom Evan had proudly named Chance, tumbled clumsily after a butterfly, his oversized paws flopping through the grass. Later, as the sun sank low behind the ridge, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold, Lily sat on the porch steps. Scout curled against her side, Faith dozing in the grass nearby. The new pup, whom Evan had proudly named Chance, tumbled clumsily after a butterfly, his oversized paws flopping through the grass. Evan joined her, flopping onto the step with a grin, dirt smudged across his cheeks. "You think Chance'll be like Faith one day?" he asked, watching the pup with hopeful eyes. Lily smiled softly, her gaze lingering on the old shepherd, the scar along her flank, the quiet strength in every breath she took. "He already is," she replied. And as dusk settled over Faith's haven, the legacy carried on, not in words carved on stone, but in the hearts of those left behind, in every paw print pressed into the dirt, every bond unspoken but unbreakable. Because some gifts never fade. They only grow stronger with time.